Hey there and welcome. Thank you for making time to join me for this mini class tonight. I know it's a busy season between Christmas and New Year's. A lot of people are on vacation and are not seeing the messages. So we're a tiny group tonight. So feel free to engage and to ask questions. Also, for anyone who watches this on the replay, please remember to like the video and drop a comment, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Those things all help to make these videos much more visible to way more people, and I really appreciate your help with that. As we work on this tonight, I'm always amazed at how many people don't want to know what the myths are. They don't want to know what information is out there about iridology that's incorrect, that has been disproved over the last about 50 years. They're willing to hold on to things that are based on information that's 80 to 90 to 100 years old, and they're not willing to move forward. I'm always shocked when I see that in the holistic health world, that some people are stuck in old paradigms and they're not willing to move forward. They're not willing to give up things that are inaccurate because they're either loyal to their teacher or they think it makes them look bad if they've been doing things one way and now we know another way is better. I tend to not be of that school at all. When I find information that is more correct, I rapidly drop the old, adopt the new, and let my students know that there's been this shift, that I've moved in this new direction because of whatever the training has been that I've taken. So that's where we're at tonight, is to look at basically things that I learned 40 years ago, 40 to 45 years ago, and how they have been proven incorrect and where we are at now. So I hope you're in for a bold 45 minutes or so as we dive into this concept tonight. Quick introduction. I know everyone who's on the call with me right now has been with me before, but for those who might be watching this on the replay, I am one of 10 level 3 certified iridology instructors through the International Iridology Practitioners Association. They've just started issuing badges a few years ago, so these are the badges I've got. But beyond that, I've been a certified iridology instructor for many years and a certified iridologist for many decades. So it's adding up for me. I've been in the holistic wellness industry since 1980. And in those years, I've developed many courses. I've written books that are all out of print, except for the textbook for dynamic iridology, which is available only to my students because it's a digital book. And I've designed many different courses on herbs, on pregnancy, on children's wellness, on herbs for the family, on you name it. I've probably designed a course about it. And I've got a list of other courses that my students have asked for that I need to get developing sometime this year. We'll get those done. I'm also a professional member of the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals, also known as CanPro, and the Canadian Association of Natural Nutritional Practitioners, known as CanP, and a member of the Alberta Herbalist Association. And with all of these, I'm a professional member, which means I have to prove my CEUs. I have to prove that I'm doing upgrade in each of these disciplines every year, as well as I do with iridology. So I'm, over the course of a year, I am typically doing, well, the herbs alone requires 40 hours of CEUs. Iridology requires 20, and my nutrition affiliations, I don't remember how many they require. I wanted to say 20 or 25. So I'm doing anywhere, from 50 to 60 hours of upgrade every year just to make sure I'm current with the new stuff in all of these fields. There's so much that research happening, right? There's so much new information coming out that we need to keep on top of it. The next dynamic iridology course is starting on February 27th. And for those of you who are with me or who are watching this, if you are a holistic health professional, and what that really means, in my opinion, you might not be a practicing health professional yet, but you've got a college level anatomy and physiology course under your belt, not a degree in A&P, but you've done a 6-credit course or 60 instructional hour course in human anatomy and physiology, and you've got a grade of a B or 80% or better, then you qualify. those are the students that I welcome and invite to join my dynamic iridology assessment system course. So if you've got that, I consider you to either be a wellness professional or a wellness professional in the making. And I would invite you then to grab that URL you see on the screen, iridology.education/course-info, and take a look at what you see there. And what you will find when you get there is after you've assimilated that bit of information, there will be an invitation for you to set up a time to speak with me about the dynamic iridology course if you are indeed serious about learning iridology, right? And if you've got that A and P under your belt already. Alrighty. And the reason I set my standards at that level where you've got to have the A and P is because if you want to certify as an iridologist with IPA, you're going to need the A and P for them. They're going to need to see proof of that, a transcript, something on an official letterhead saying the course and what grade you got. And it's got to be from a school that they recognize, right? And so, or you've got to be a licensed health professional like an RN, an ND, something like that, a dental hygienist, whatever, that's where you've got a current license, and that would count as well. And so I want that A and P up front because it means we can go deeper with iridology than just matching one marking to one symptom, which is a very surface level of doing iridology, and it's not really helpful, but we want to go deep. We want to be able to create programs for our clients that are going to be useful and take them somewhere. Let's talk about the history of things. Now, with this, we know that science evolves. Right? If we watch the evolution of science from the beginning, well, not from the beginning, when was the beginning, right? But if we watch the evolution of science, if we watch scientific discovery, we know that things evolve, that people ask better questions, they get better answers, they ask better questions, they get better answers, and what we knew 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago is maybe no longer valid. It may not be accurate with what we know now. We know that some people still think the earth is flat. I just saw some social media posts about some flat earthers who went to Antarctica and they discovered that the world really is round because of having 24-hour sun down there this time of year. Very interesting. And so we just need to remember as iridologists that we have got to keep up with the research. We've got to keep moving forward. We know that iridology has its foundations in Egypt, India, China, and Greece. And of course, they've got some really good foundations when we think about traditional Chinese medicine. They have an understanding of the body that we in the Western world just don't get. We just don't understand things on that level. They didn't do a lot with iridology, but they did some. And so we want to keep asking questions and doing more research. And there is research going on in iridology. I'm going to start with a myth here. This is the myth of the owl story. This myth goes like this. Ignaz van Petzschle, who later became a medical doctor, was 11 years old in Hungary. He caught an owl. The story has many iterations. The most common one is an owl. The owl had a broken wing, and what Ignaz noticed was there was a black line developed in the owl's eye. As Ignaz nursed this owl back to health, he noticed that black line disappeared. So we've got a couple of problems with this story. Now, first off, a bird's iris has a very, very different structure from a human iris. In fact, most animal irises have a different structure from a human iris. So we can't extrapolate from a bird to a human. That's the first thing. We also have never had this replicated. You would think that with all of the veterinary texts, the wild bird rescue sanctuaries where damaged birds are brought in and they're nursed back to health and then they're rehabilitated and then released to the wild, you would think that somebody there would have noticed something similar, but it's never ever been documented. So we have to take a step back from this owl story, and we have to give Ignaz credit for what it did for him. Regardless of what he saw, what he didn't see, we'll never know, right? He didn't have the equipment to document this accurately, but it spurred in him an interest. He wondered if the human iride could give information about the human condition. So he became a medical doctor and he started drawing out his patient's eyes with colored pencils of some description, whatever they had back in the 1800s, and started correlating their stories. And that was the beginning of one of the first iridology maps. And it's very similar to the maps that we often use today. Now, Ignaz's uncle said this. He recognized years later that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eye, not that of a human, and that he did not have the proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in the stories. As Ellen Jensen says, it's time for iridology to move forward based on sound research rather than hearsay. Amen to that, right? Amen to that. Then we have Pastor Neil Lilliquist. Now, many of these pastors in Central Europe were also medical doctors, which is very interesting. He correlated correctly that when we have an eye that has very dense fiber, so a high thread count per square inch, this is a body that is more able to resist disease and breakdown. And it also will respond more quickly when given the right tools to repair itself. He noticed that if an eye had a lot of open areas like this iris does, these people seem to not be able to ward off disease and degeneration as easily. Now this is where one of our myths comes in, because we know the fiber stuff is absolutely correct. Like, you, Pastor Neil Lilliquist, we love what you said. But he said that he felt that the eye would change due to toxic exposure. So he felt that pigment patches like this and colors like this meant this person had been exposed to toxins. And, if they'd been exposed to toxins and it had put it there, didn't it make sense that you could do something to take that out? Now, one of the challenges here is a lot of these early researchers were publishing books on their theories. And those theories were adopted by many people as being gospel truth. They didn't realize these books were theoretical. They took them as proof, but they were not proven yet. And so this is where we run into trouble. We have Pastor Emanuel Felke in Germany. He started by laying the foundation of the different constitutions we talk about today: lymphatic, biliary, hematogenic. And he was an iridology instructor. There's an institute in Germany called the Felke Institute that teaches iridology. We have Rudolf Schnabel, also in Germany. This is all happening in Germany. Notice these years. We've got World War II in these people's lifespans. We've got the Cold War. We've got no information coming over from any of the communist areas of Europe. And that's where a lot of the research was going on, right? So Rudolf researched pigment and pupil tonus. So he wanted to know, does pupil size and shape change anything? Does it modify how the body responds to things? He wanted to know, if I see a brown pigment or a yellow pigment or an orange pigment, what does that teach us? He was one of the first to actually use a microscope to examine the iris. Very cool. So he was forward thinking, wondering where Ignaz van Petzele was using a 2-power magnifying glass, which is not very strong. Rudolf is thinking, how do I get in there and see more? So he started using a microscope. He also said this. He's way ahead of his time on this one. It was no easy task, and those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy, also known as iridology, can be learned within a few weeks or even days are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause. I cringe when I think of the number of people I know of who are practicing iridology based on a 12-hour weekend workshop, or based on, do I have it at hand here? I don't think I do. That little booklet called Iridology Simplified by Bernard Jensen. I look at that book and I go, oh my goodness, there's so much information in there that's been disproved, but people are using that as their gospel and that's all they know and they're going with it. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is not a good thing. There's so much more to know than that. Joseph Ungerer, he was one of Schnabel's students. He became a naturopath and he was concerned about the different languages that were being used by iridologists. Every person who was doing research was coming up with their own words to describe things, their own vocabulary. That was creating a lot of confusion. So Joseph tried to get everybody on the same page, tried to get them using the same verbiage for everything. He also knew that students were reading books and accepting the printed word about iridology before adequate research had been completed. So exactly what I said about books were being published that were based on theory. They had not been proven, and he was concerned about this. Man of integrity, he refused to publish his work until he had had his work vetted by his professional peers. He would come up with a theory, he'd run it past them, have them test drive it for a while. And when everybody was in consensus that this was valid, then and only then was he publishing it and putting it out there. Joseph Deck was an iridology researcher, and he pioneered iridology photography. We are grateful for that. Photography makes everything so much easier, but we need to remember that photography has its limitations, right? If regardless of what you're using for photography, the room lighting will make a difference. The lighting within your camera equipment will make a difference. The freshness or the staleness of the batteries in your cameras will make a difference. What you are viewing those images on will make a difference. I've got 2 large screens connected to my computer so that I can swipe images from one to the next and see many images at the same time. And they display color very differently. One of them makes things look a lot bluer, the other makes it look a lot more orangey yellow. And so it's like, right, we've got that discrepancy. And then if I print these up on my photo printer, I get yet another color rendition. So even though we've got photography, which will help us to isolate locations of things more easily without our clients getting sore, dry eyes, we still need to be aware of the limitations of technology. He was also an instructor. Theodor Kriege, also in Germany. Are you seeing a theme here? A lot of good research going on in that Germany area. He said, I hope that a later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded, and they still haven't succeeded. And he said this way back in 1962. So here we are 60 years later, and we are still not there. Right? He felt that iridology was the #1 assessment tool, but it was best combined with other assessment tools. That if you understood urine analysis or hands or fingernails or tongue or feces, if you had any other assessment tools and could dovetail them with the iridology, you would get a lot further, a lot faster. He studied with Unger, Deck, and Schnabel. He had 3 great teachers. In North America, we have Bernard Jensen, who, of course, was the father of iridology in North America. He kept iridology alive in North America when there was no more information coming from Europe during those dark, dark years. And we bless him for this. We are ever so grateful that he had the fortitude to stick with it and keep teaching this. A lot of what he was teaching has been proven incorrect and has been updated by his daughter-in-law. We love, love, love that he kept it going, though. Then we have Harry Wolff, who was an American-born German, fluent in both English and German, both in reading and speaking. He got his hands on a Joseph Deck book published in German, and he started reading it. And Joseph was writing about constitutional iridology, the foundation of which we understand now, right? And he started teaching that around in little weekend workshops and little county fairs kind of things. He connected with Bill Cardano, who at the time was a registered pharmacist. And Bill was loving what he was hearing. Even though he was a pharmacist, Bill had a strong leaning towards the natural side. So they teamed up and they started teaching these workshops. Bill began teaching iridology at Bastyr Naturopathic College in Seattle, and he later became a naturopath as well. He is still a very busy naturopath in Seattle, specializing in pain management. Bill was my constitutional teacher. I am still in touch with him to this day. I appreciate him mentoring me. There are 3 primary styles of iridology practiced in North America. Now, there's a lot of offshoots, so we're not going to pigeonhole everything. Jensenian is probably the biggest one, And Jensen is the foundation for a lot of the other offshoots that are out there, whether you're talking about Morris or Pesach or whatever, right? They're all kind of offshoots of that. Rayed, which is also known as the emotional iridology, and constitutional, which is the one we are going to be talking about tonight. So Jensen was originally taught by Bernard Jensen. He taught that the iris changes when the body changes, that healing lines would appear when you had healing happening, that lacunae shape and size, or as he called them, lesion shape and size, would change as healing happened. We now know this is incorrect, and we now understand why he said that, and that helps us understand why he said it, right? Traditional Jensenian iridologists have often done iris readings cold with no background information from the client. That's not very holistic. Like, sit down, look in my eyes, tell me what's wrong, tell me what to do about it, and I'm out of here, kind of thing, right? Not very holistic, and in truth, not very accurate. We do need information. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We need information from our clients. Traditional Jensenian iridologists have a very different style from modern Jensenians, because the modern Jensenians, under the influence of Bernard Jensen's daughter-in-law, Ellen, she's updated his work to be much more constitutional, not purely constitutional, but much more constitutional. And so anyone that she has taught, or anyone sort of in her iridology family, has more of a constitutional leaning. So they're very different from the original Jensenian iridologists. Rayed iridology teaches that emotional traits are genetic and are revealed by markings in the irides. You've probably seen this in friends or in family, where there's a young person who has a mannerism that is exactly like an older relative who has been deceased for many years, and these two never had contact. So how did this child learn this behavior from someone that they didn't know personally? Genetics, right? Readings may be done cold. Information gathered from the irides may be combined with personal and family history information for interpretation. I love dabbling in Rayed. We don't get into it deeply in the dynamic iridology course, but we do touch on bits of it because it can be very helpful in helping us to understand a person's symptoms. Founded by Denny Johnson, continued by Jim Verges as behavioral iridology, and in the UK, we've got John Andrews, who also teaches emotional iridology. Constitutional, which is where we want to land, originated with Joseph Deck and others, and it's used by medical doctors in Italy, Germany, and Russia. Interesting, I recently had a client come in who is a doctor, was a doctor. She and her husband were both doctors in one of those countries, those little countries right next to Russia, right? And she has not done what she needs to practice medicine here in Canada, but her husband has. So she came in to see me, and I asked her if we could do iridology. And she said, "You do iridology?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "That's the first thing that doctors do in my country. You go in and they look at your eyes and they figure out from your eyes and your symptoms what they need to be doing with you." It's like, well, that's exactly how I use it. That's how I teach my clients to use it. There are correlative medical studies being done, some interesting bits of research coming out now and in the last year or two. Constitutional teaches that eyes are a reflection of genetic structure of the body. Think of what we see in the irides as epigenetics. So we see potentials. We all have epigenes, and whether they're turned on or turned off will determine what kinds of symptoms we have, how the body is functioning. When we look at the iris and we see pigments and we see different structure in the iris, that is epigenes. It's not an absolute guarantee that a person's going to have a problem there, but it tells us that there's the potential for some kind of an imbalance with that organ. This is why it's so important to have anatomy and physiology, so that we can then understand what could those problems look like if they are developing. Does the client have symptoms now that correlate with that epigenetic thing that we're seeing? Right? We need to be able to tie things together. Is this all making sense? If this is making sense, give me a thumbs up or a comment of some sort in the chat box. All right. Yeah, it's making sense. Thanks, Marie. I appreciate that. Okay. Constitutional iridology is the foundation of what I teach as dynamic iridology. Constitutional teaches us that iridology does not give us answers. It tells us what questions to ask, right? It doesn't give us a disease name, but it tells us that the body has an epigene in this area, in this organ. And when we understand how that organ functions, then we know what questions to ask and we know how to correlate symptoms to that organ. Other iris and sclera changes may continue to be visible with time, revealing areas that may need support, just like epigenes getting turned on and turned off. Background information is important. We never do readings cold. I sometimes get new people in to my office, and they've been to iridologists who do the old Jensenian style, and they'll say, just, I want you to read my eyes. No, that's not what I do. I mean, it's not like you're going to a fortune teller, and we don't do that here. I need to have a conversation with you. I want to understand what your health concerns are. Then I'm going to use your eyes to help me understand what questions I need to ask and to help me understand why you've got that problem, so that I can give you sound recommendations that can help your body to work its way out of that problem. So I started learning iridology back in 1979. Constitutional iridology was not here yet. We only had Jensenian. I latched onto it and just ran with it. It was the neatest thing since ever. But after about 5 years, I was starting to get frustrated because I had been promised that if I saw an eye like this one, and if we did the right things, we could get rid of these loops, totally get rid of them. And that we would see that these were healing lines, that this was meaning this body was healing. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting because this person's been, eating Twinkies and Coca-Cola. They've been eating all this junk food. How's their body healing? They've been hard on their body. Maybe they've been using street drugs and alcohol and smoking and things like that. How's their body healing? Why is it healing? And so what we know with constitutional is this is not healing lines. These were there all along. These are never going to disappear. They're going to give us information about where we need to be paying attention, possibly, as we correlate that to symptoms. So about 10 years into iridology, I was about ready to walk away from it. This wasn't making sense. Eyes were not changing the way I was promised they would. My clients were doing really hardcore programs. Yes, they should have been changing, but they weren't. Trash this. But then I got to learn constitutional iridology, and it just made so much sense to me that I had to grab it and run with it. So in constitutional iridology, we know that these eyes are not going to change because of diet or lifestyle or supplements or fasts or cleanses or anything like that. What we know is that these, we call these lacunae, teach us about things that have been inherited. These are passed down through the generations. They show us where there is a genetic epigene, a familial epigene that has been passed down. These are not going to change. In this person's eye, these specifically on a very broad scale mean this person is going to be prone to endocrine imbalances. So we need to ask questions. Now, this was actually one of my daughters-in-law who came to see me because her doctor was starting to say, and this is about 16 or 17 years ago, was saying, I think you've got polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so she came and she said, Mom, what do I do with this? And I looked at her eyes and I went, well, I know what your diet's like. That's our starting point, because you're eating exactly to feed PCOS and to keep it flourishing. If we want to get you out of that, we've got to fix your diet, right? And so we need to know, what are they doing? What are they doing? And already that's good or bad. And how do we help them fix that? When people with eyes like this are on track, and we need to constantly be encouraging them, they might need more coaching to help keep their blood sugars balanced. And with PCOS, if the blood sugars are out of balance, the hormones have to be out of balance, right? So by correcting the diet to bring the blood sugars into balance, we bring the hormones into a better balance. An eye like this, we want to support digestion. We want to encourage creativity. And when we talk about doing iridology and doing it to help people improve their health, we need to remember that it's not just food and supplements. It's exercise, it's physical activity, it's stress management, it's how are they expressing themselves? How do they need to express themselves? And what are their genes saying they need for expression, right? And we need to take all of that into account. So where this would have been in old Jensen iridology, problem, 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 problem. Each one of these is a problem. Every fiber that's going sideways in here is a problem. Every little cloudy blob is a problem. The digestive system in this person is a problem, right? That's the Jensenian style. It's not the constitutional style. The constitutional style, again, wants to recognize that these, because of where they're located, all work together. Each of them is not likely a problem on its own, but collectively they can create that risk of imbalance. We want to find out how this person's digestion is functioning. And from there, we need to coach on foods, on what they need to do when they're eating, on supplements to help them digest their food better. Right? We've got a lot of different layers of information that we want to be coaching someone with eyes like this on. As a Jensenian iridologist, this eye was toxic. Oh my goodness. You've got so much buildup toxins. We absolutely have to do a major cleanse with you. And if we do the right cleanse, your eyes are going to turn blue. You do your homework just right. These eyes will turn blue. We'll get rid of all of this. That's what we taught as Jensenians. And you will hear Jensenians still saying that now. And they will sell expensive big programs to help you do this cleanse to turn these eyes blue. And you'll see various people suggesting that they've got before and after pictures that eye colors have changed. Remember what I said at the beginning about photography? If you look carefully at the photos, you will see one of a few things. The first thing you'll probably notice is different photography, different cameras, different lighting, maybe different age of photos. You think of the old school photos, right? If you've got school photos that are 30 or 40 years old and they've been exposed to light, they're all turning brown, right? You've probably noticed that. They're almost going sepia on their own, right? And so that's going to not be a valid comparison for before and after. School photos were always done with very warm lighting. We try to use a very white light, not a yellow light, when we do iris photos. That's going to change how the image appears. We also, the first thing we need to be aware of then is photography. I have had people who are trained iridologists under other schools of iridology, other thoughts of iridology, tell me I'm a bad iridologist, as they showed me before and after photos. My instructor gave us these photos before and after, before and after. Look what happens when you do his program. And I'm saying, but different cameras. Different cameras, different lighting means different output, which means these are invalid for before and after. Oh, you're lying. You're a bad iridologist. It's like, no, talk to any photography store. Don't take my word for it. Go to a photography store, take them those photos and ask them, how would these photos, why are these photos so different? What are the different technical aspects of these photos? And they'll tell you that the equipment you use makes a difference. And if you don't use the same equipment for your before and afters, you have no comparison, right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? If it does, let me know. Let me know. You know, back when I was at Jensenian, I had no idea about technology here. I just thought all cameras were perfect. And, you know, learned when I got my first iridology camera, that was a print film camera back in the day, that when I would take that to the photo lab to get it printed up, that depending on the settings they used, depending on the brand of film I used, depending on the paper they printed on, would all change the output. So it wasn't just the camera then, it was what came after. So in constitutional iridology, an eye like this we're going to be wondering, genetically, the liver and the kidneys are going to be our dominant considerations here. The sympathetic nervous system is going to be a dominant consideration here. When we've got this darker area closer to the pupil, this is suggesting that we've got maybe some liver influence on the digestive system. So how is the liver? Is this person doing things that are liver supportive? Because if they are, then the digestion is likely not suffering as much as it would if they were abusing their liver, right? We want to find out client symptoms. Do they have symptoms of liver? Most people don't know what their liver does, and we need to give them some ideas of what kinds of symptoms they might have. What about their kidneys? What about their digestive function? Are they prone to holding stress? So many of us think, no, I don't hold stress at all. Yeah, and yet we do. And so we need to get our people thinking about where they hold their stress, how it shows up in their body. Does the stress affect their digestion? Is it creating muscle tension in their shoulders? Do they get headaches from it? Do they get tired from it? Right? We want to know what their diet and their lifestyle is. We want to know what they're already doing for their health. Maybe they're doing a lot of things really well. And there's just a couple of little key things that we need to tweak for them that will help them to get results faster. The answers determine the approach. I was just reading through some testimonials that I've had in my file for years. You know, every now and then I like to do that. It's just kind of fun to remember people who I've worked with. I remember, and this one was a woman who I met. She was in her mid to late 40s, and she'd had migraine headaches since she was 6 years old. She'd used every high test medication. As she described it, she was stoned through the years she was raising her children. She was legally stoned because she was having migraines 28 days of the month, right? 28 days, that's brutal. You know, she said, I'd get up to take my drugs. I'd go back to bed until they kicked in, and then I could get up and function, right? Just terrible, terrible pain. When I worked with her the very first time, looking at her eyes and looking at her diet, I asked her, and I didn't tell her she should do this. I asked her what did she think of the idea of stopping the meds for 2 weeks, because I can't tell her to stop drugs. I'm not a doctor. What did you think of the idea of doing an experiment of stopping the medications for 2 weeks? Because one of the side effects of the medications was migraine headaches. And then I said, and then we would need to do these few things with her diet. And we just started with about 3 or 4 really simple things. And I said, you need to go home and talk to your husband about this, because it's going to be at least 2 weeks, and you're probably going to feel like a Mack truck hit you. And you're going to be even less functional, probably have more headache while you are doing this, but 2 weeks will get you through a withdrawal, and then we can see what we're really working with. So I don't want you to tell me right now. I want you to go home and talk to your husband, make sure that you've got the family on board to catch you during this 2 weeks. And she called me back just hours later, and she said, yeah, my husband and I agree. I've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. By the end of 2 weeks, the first about week was like a nightmare. It was terrible. But then in that second week, she started having pain-free periods, like pain-free episodes, right? She was starting to see the migraines lift. And as we worked together over 3 or 4 months, we got her down to where she was only having 1 migraine a month, usually PMS, and a minor headache at ovulation. As she said, I think I've got my life back, right? Now, I wouldn't have known to go all those directions if I hadn't seen her eyes. And these are not her eyes, by the way. But it was just, it's, you know, see the eyes, hear the symptoms, put it together, ask the questions, create the first steps of your protocol, and then you keep developing the protocol from one appointment to the next. With constitutional iridology and the old iridology, again, every pigment, every color that we see in the eye that is not the base color of the eye is a toxic deposit. That's the old style. These are things that need to be cleansed out. Let me sell you an expensive program. And there are people out there selling very expensive programs, and I know because there are people in Calgary who bought those programs, and they got these like 15 bottles of herbs, and now they don't know what to do with them, and there's no after sales support. So they bring it to me and say, what do I do? Okay, let's weed through this. So as I was getting frustrated with iridology, I learned about constitutional. Back then, Harry Wolf had created a few little VHS videotapes, 6 hours worth to be precise, which I bought and I studied backwards, forwards, inside out, upside down. If they had been in Greek, Latin, or Italian, I probably would have known them. Not that I speak any of those languages. And then I brought Bill Caradonna up to teach a certification course here twice, right? And what I learned is that the predisposition for pigments is also epigenetic. So when we see a pigment like this, we know that there's a genetic something that has been passed down through the family. And when these pigments show up later in life, because no baby is born with the pigments, right? They develop usually in that first 6 months to 6 years, but they can and do develop after that as well. When we see these, we know that an epigene has been turned on or turned off. It has been activated, whichever way that means that epigene has to go. And it helps us to understand where an organ or organ system might be wanting to go out of balance. Now, here's the catch. When something has been deposited into the iris, there is no way to get it out. There's no system that will pull it out. These pigments are not an accumulation of toxins. They show us inherent predispositions of organs that are prone to being out of balance. We don't get to cleanse these out. So with constitutional iridology, we look for patterns to understand the interrelationship of organs, right? And then we need to find out, is the client doing things that support those organs or not? If they're supporting them, yay, we give them a round of applause and we encourage them and we build on what they're doing. If what they're doing is not supportive, then we want to be encouraging them, baby steps, little steps. And when we see a pigment like this, it's telling us liver wants to create some havoc. So easy things to do to support the liver, get some leafy greens, get leafy greens every day, right? Cut out the alcohol, right? There's some easy things that we can do and we can build from there. So this person that we're looking at may have issues with their connective tissue, with their kidneys not keeping up, with their liver wanting to fall behind, with the lymphatic system wanting to be sluggish and lazy, and therefore the immune system struggling a bit. So what would the symptoms be of those areas? That's what we need to keep in the back of our mind. So as our client is giving us their symptoms, we're starting to connect the dots. What is their diet like? What is the lifestyle like? Now, this is a young lady. She's in her mid-20s. Her diet's not great. And she does like her alcohol a little too much. She's a hard worker and she does not have good connective tissue. She's always complaining of knee and ankle kinds of issues. And so we're working very hard to encourage her to cut back on the alcohol. Eventually, I'd like to have it cut out because I know her family and I know that they are heavy drinkers, and that's not a good thing for a young woman who wants to be starting a family in the next few years. Right? So I'm wanting her to cut that out. We're working on getting her to increase her vegetable intake to make sure she's getting enough protein and to make sure she's digesting it really well. Old iridology would say with this person, with all of these rings coming around the eye, would say one thing about that, and it would be either you've just had a nervous breakdown or you're heading towards one. With these lines radiating outwards, it would say you've got parasites and we need to do a cleanse. So here's some problems with that. Now, if you heard any of those things about nervous breakdowns or parasites, that you can see parasites in the eyes, if you have, give me parasites in the chat box. If you've heard anything like that on social media. Now, the problems with this are that these do not mean you've had a nervous breakdown or you're heading into a nervous breakdown. Absolutely not. It does tell us you internalize stress and that you burn your B vitamins and your nerve nutrients at an incredibly fast rate. Okay. These lines radiating out have nothing to do with parasites. We could put this client on a parasite cleanse from now until the cows come home. These lines are not disappearing. These are actual breaks in the iris surface that are letting us look down into the iris surface. Like you've got a crack in a mountain and you're looking into that crevice, right? That's exactly what we're looking at there. Constitutional iridology instead backs us up. Now, these are the eyes of an Asian woman who was in her mid-30s. Her concern was infertility. The fertility clinic had been unable to help her. Now, when I see these contraction furrows, I know that she internalizes her stress and she burns through her nerve nutrients very quickly. So when she and her husband came in, I asked about stress, and her husband just kind of laughed because they're both accountants in different businesses. And he knows exactly what kind of a day she's had by the mood she brings home with her, right? And he knows whether he's cooking dinner that night or whether she is, based on her mood. And so she would internalize the stress, burn her B vitamins. Now, because of her eye color, I suspected that she might have problems methylating her Bs. And if she doesn't methylate her Bs properly, her hormones will not be balanced. So we had to take her off her gummy prenatals. I wish those things would just be taken off the market. They are insipid, they are weak, they have poor ingredients, and they're loaded with sugar. That's not what this woman needed. And we put her on a much better, like probably the best prenatal I've ever seen. And it's got the methylated Bs in it. So that was going to help. We also know that her liver has been unhappy for a long time, and that would push her towards cholesterol issues and blood sugar imbalance, right? Well, interesting, as we're talking, she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is exactly where I was heading with my questions with her. As I look at all of these signs, these things do not mean type 2 diabetes and PCOS. But when I put them together with her symptoms, I had to think that. I had to wonder if that could be the issue. And it was. I would not have been able to arrive at those conclusions had I not had her eyes, right? Had I not known iridology, particularly constitutional. So when we worked with her on that level, type 2 diabetes and PCOS, which again, balance the blood sugars, to balance the hormones, do some extra things to support the hormones, to get her cycling regularly so that she now is fertile as opposed to the PCOS non-fertile. And we were able, it took us 18 months, but we were able to get her balanced to the point where she did conceive and she had a healthy pregnancy. She did not develop gestational diabetes. The doctors had promised her she would go gestational diabetic because of the type 2 diabetes. She did not. She delivered a beautiful little boy, 7 pounds something, in a 4-hour labor delivery. She was a petite little Asian thing. I don't know how she popped that baby out so fast, but she did a great job. She did a great job. So no hint of parasites here, but absolutely that internalizing of stress, how that plays with the nervous system, how that messes with the B vitamins, how that and diet will mess with fertility, right? So this is where we need to know how the body works. You'll hear people say we can use photos to monitor changes in your eyes. And this is a prime example of, oh, no, you can't. Oh, no, you can't. These are my husband's eyes. These are his eyes. I took this with my very first print film camera when he was 42 years of age, right? So it was an Olympus camera, professional body with a special lighting setup on the front to do iridology. I shot Kodak film, and the lab I used printed on Kodak paper, right? So that's what his eyes looked like then. Then I got a new digital camera, 24 megapixel. And of course I wasn't printing anything up then. This is just a digital photo, but because it didn't have an incandescent light, which is a yellowish light, it had an LED light, which is a bluish light. That's one of the things that is affecting the color change. I promise you his skin color has not changed like this, right? His eye color has not changed like this. His eye color really is kind of halfway in between. It's not quite this bright, but it's also not quite this gray-green. right? It's kind of halfway in between. Now, these are the exact same eye. Let's take a look at this and let's talk about why they are different. And this is where so many people say, you can cleanse things out and the eyes will change. Most people would say that this looks like he's done some cleansing. He's my husband. I have him on supplements. We've got a clean diet, right? I don't cleanse him. And although I think we are going to do a cleanse later on this month, just for fun. So these are both handheld, which means that we're not always completely level on the horizon, if you will. So this is this. This is right here. All right, so we've got two key markers. We've got this one squiggly fiber right here, and it is right here. So why does this look so much fatter than this? It has to do with the pupil size. When the pupil is large, the iris tissue gets compressed, it gets squished. And when you squish it, it's like a balloon. If you've got one of those balloons that you make party animals out of, you know, when you start twisting it and squeezing it, different parts of it get fatter and different parts of it get thinner. That's what happens here. When we compress this tissue, these are going to get wider. When we stretch this tissue out, as happens with a smaller pupil, that's going to get narrower. This is what people used to say meant healing. Oh, look, this is so much smaller now, but they weren't accounting for pupil size. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me pupil in the chat box. Now, while you're typing that, notice that all these years ago, down here, there's no extra pigment. But at the age of 65, we have a lot of extra pigment. This has acquired under the influence of epigenetics. Right? My husband doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink. And I don't mean he doesn't drink much. He doesn't drink at all. We don't consume alcohol. He doesn't drink coffee. He doesn't drink black tea. I can't tell you the last time we bought white sugar. I probably bought it for bottling fruit years ago, and we probably still got some left. We use mostly honey and some maple syrup and some coconut sugar, right? That's it. We don't use white flour. We grind our own whole grain flour, right? All of our breads are multi-grain whole grain. So we've got a clean diet. Our meats are typically wild game, right? So we've got a clean diet. We have a water purifying system, right? And yet he has acquired this. This is his liver telling us it wants to wreak havoc with a few different organs, and we are working with his liver constantly. We're kind of bribing it along so that it will leave these other organs alone, right? Is this making sense? Pupil Marie, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, so the one thing that does change is the cornea, the sclera. So when we look at the sclera, we don't have this really clearly here, but you can see this. I call it the Harry Potter blood vessel. If you know the Harry Potter story, you know what I'm talking about. You can see how it's gotten thicker with time. You can see how this blood vessel that used to be very thick is now very thin. This is where we see the dynamic changes. So the iris shows us what the genetic potentials are. The sclera shows us where things are happening now. Okay, so we can monitor change. This doesn't give us a disease name, but when we understand the sclera, we understand which organs are under stress now. If we see anything correlating genetically in the iris, we know we're going to have to work really deeply. If we don't see anything correlating in the iris, then we know that we probably don't have to work quite so deeply. We just need to have a good focus. These are my eyes. This is, again, that concept of healing lines appear, black lines happen with broken bones. My eye in 2017, March 2019, I want you to really focus right in this area. March 2019, I fell and broke my wrist in 2 places, ended up having surgery to install 2 metal plates in my wrist. This was taken literally just a couple of days after the surgery. So one would think that if a black line were going to appear, it should appear if you've got 2 broken bones. it should appear, people say you can see surgery in the eye. Well, there's no difference between this and this. And yet I had a double surgery, 2 incisions on my wrist so they could get to the bones they needed to actually put the plates in. Then literally 10 weeks later on Mother's Day, I fell down the stairs at my son's home, tripped wearing high heels, never wear high heels on stairs, just caught my heel literally on about the second to the bottom stair, and down I went, landed on my elbow, same arm, broke the olecranon. I had to look up what an olecranon is, and it's literally the bone, your elbow bone. Same arm. So we've now had 2 broken bones in the wrist, and 10 weeks later, snap the olecranon off. Shouldn't there be a black line in here somewhere? You cut a broken bone. That required surgery. Again, I wasn't quite as on top of it this time. It took me a few more weeks to get to doing follow-up photos. So I've got hardware in my elbow, wires and pins to hold that together so it could heal. It's healed beautifully, by the way, but there's no indication of, any kind of a break. Now, you'll notice things are a little bit different from one to the next. This camera is, this lighting setup is a little bit older. Did I have that one? No, that's all new. So it's the same lighting setup, but the difference here is that I had different settings on the camera, different shutter speed, right? And different focal distance, the f-stop and the shutter speed. And that will also change how the images come out. So we need to be really precise about writing down what settings we had the camera on to replicate things as closely as we can if we want to try to do before and after photos. All right. Toxins, can we cleanse them out? And this is not talk. Are pigments equal toxins? No, they don't. Can we cleanse them out? No, we can't. And if my husband and I do this cleanse in the next couple of weeks, we'll shoot his eyes again. In fact, I'll do before and afters of both of us, and we'll see if there's anything different in them for doing a cleanse, but there won't be. We know that already. Harry Wolff, one of the fellows who was the founder of Constitutional North America, said this: in fact, it's bogus and a dogma only found in some holdouts from the Lindlar, Kritzer, and Jensen schools of thought. The notion that certain metals, minerals, toxins routinely show up as diagnostic indicators in the iris has long been refuted and proven unreliable. There is no evidence to support the notion that heavy metal toxicity is measurable in the iris, likewise drugs, candida, etc. Dark spots are genetically predetermined, as is the overall color scheme. Can you make lacunae disappear with cleansing? So this is one of my son's eyes. Again, notice people would assume that this was taken first because, oh, look at this. This is so big here. Oh my goodness. And then they would say, oh, this was the second photo. Look at how much smaller things are. But we've already talked about how pupil size is going to affect things. And it does make it look like things are disappearing, but really they're just being stretched out. And as you stretch these fibers out, they're going to look like they're coming closer together. Okay, so we don't make them disappear with cleansing. This is one of my sons who's never done a cleanse in his life and probably won't for many years. Can we see parasites? We've already said no, not at all. These have nothing to do with parasites. If these had something to do with parasites, it would say that parasites are genetic and that I could pass parasites to my children through my DNA. Not doable. You can give parasites to anybody you want, but it's not through your DNA, right? And so when we see these are not parasites. This is not go take a bunch of black walnut and garlic and pumpkin seed. Nothing like that. So which iridology chart is correct? This is a good question. And when we look at that, it depends on what you want to do. This is the map that Bill Cardona developed first, and then I have updated it with his blessing because his was developed far enough back that there was some pieces missing with research. This one is the most uncluttered map you'll ever see. And the reason I love using this one is because it's uncluttered. It focuses on organs that are biologically active, that are metabolically active. So as a general rule, how the pinky finger or the knee is behaving is not going to affect metabolism. So I don't need an area for knee here. I don't need an area for ear or for shoulder or for spine, because on a day-to-day basis for most people, those things are not affecting their overall health. And so this is a constitutional chart that focuses on the organs that are metabolically active, which is all of your primary organs. And these rings are about different functionalities within the body, right? And so this is the map we like to use, nice and simple. The other thing is, so many of the other maps have every organ divided into such tiny subdivisions that if you're even off by 1 or 2 degrees, your whole assessment is incorrect, right? Which makes it really difficult. That doesn't mean I never use those maps, but they're certainly not my go-to. They're not the ones that I'm going to use in a clinical situation because they're too complex, which is going to take time. And in an appointment, we don't have a lot of time to be dipsy doodling around with things. Is brown pigment in a blue eye an indication of toxicity? Is yellow pigment an indication of sulfur buildup? No, 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 right? We've already talked about that. We read the quote from Harry Wolff saying, no, these are not toxic buildup. We are not going to cleanse this person and turn these eyes blue. We're just not. Is white in a blue iris an indication of scarring or stagnant lymph? No, 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 no. When we see certain white in certain areas of the eye, it suggests a predisposition towards stagnant lymph, but it's not a guarantee they have stagnant lymph right now. I've seen that predisposition in people who had a clean diet and were physically active. That should be keeping their lymphatic system moving. Everything we see in the iris is genetic potential. Genetic potential. It's not a crystal ball. Some people think they can learn everything they need to know about iridology from books and YouTube videos. So if by everything you mean 1 mark equals 1 problem, then yep, you can learn that. That's a pretty shallow party game version of iridology. If, on the other hand, you want to learn iridology at a professional level, one that teaches you how to think through an assessment quickly and accurately, one that teaches you how iris indicators work together to flesh out the story, then no, you can't learn it all from books and videos. There's too many nuances that cannot be taught that way. To learn iridology at a deep and professional level requires mentoring and feedback, things that you're only going to get from a live instructor. Can we diagnose diseases using iridology? Nope, absolutely not. Only licensed medical practitioners are legally allowed to diagnose. Iridologists, even if we are NDs or MDs, do not diagnose from the iris. Now, you know, when I first learned Jensenian iridology, I was taught we could diagnose, and I was doing a lot of diagnosing, and I was often wrong, like almost always wrong. It was just, it wasn't working. We cannot diagnose from the eyes. Trying to diagnose from the eyes is what gave iridology a bad name decades ago. With constitutional, instead of diagnosing disease, we understand processes. We understand how things are linked together. Bill Cardona said this: iridology cannot be used to diagnose. It is a unique assessment tool to gain understanding of the blueprint of the body, including tendencies towards illness patterns or assessment of resiliency, resistance against negative influences. But diagnosing the presence or status of illness or disease is never appropriate. So that is exactly why I teach iridology the way I teach it, right? Often students will ask, how long does it take to learn iridology? Well, again, with learning iridology, we're not going for 1 marking equals 1 problem. And so it's going to take a while to learn it well. We need to understand the organs. We need to understand their functions. You need to bring that in with you when you're learning iridology. And then the course that I teach is 45 to 50 hours of instructional time. And then there's mentorship, and there's lots of ongoing mentorship even after the course is completed. Can you learn a living with iridology? Yeah, you can earn a living with iridology. You need to know how to market yourself. And iridology as a standalone is never going to fly. right? You need to have a modality. You need to have nutrition or herbology or something like that to back it up. No one wants to just know what's wrong. They want to know what to do about it. So you need to have the what to do about it skills as well. I found a course that is taught from books and videos. Good enough? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. And I say that because you can't learn all the nuances from books and videos. Iridology is not a formulaic science. Two people can have the same marking, and that marking may mean a couple of different things. So you have to know what else to look for, and you have to know what questions to ask. You have to know how to think through this iris, and you don't learn that kind of thought process from a book. You learn it from live instruction, where you're being mentored, where we're practicing together, where I'm literally holding your feet up to the fire to help you think through things, to make you think deeper. So the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is the only live online course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. And again, when I say nutritionists, herbalists, naturopaths, anybody who's got that college level anatomy and physiology course qualifies to speak with me about this program. The goal of this is to help you stop working unpaid overtime to develop client programs, help you stop overwhelming your clients with unmanageable programs, and to create programs that will increase your client compliance and their success and help you create long-term retention. This course is for you if you want to learn more than markers. If you want to learn clinical application, this course will teach you markers and clinical application. I designed this course specifically for health professionals, which is why I don't let just anybody into the course. Very, very important to me that we keep that standard up. Mike Knapp is a naturopath in Arizona. I asked him, why did you take this course? He said, the interactive online platform with an experienced teacher and practitioner. You said the fundamentals of iridology could be learned in this format, and that's what was delivered, plus a lot more on how to integrate it directly into current practice. I'm very happy with the training, so thank you. So that's very cool. So here's my invitation to you. If you're ready to learn constitutional iridology, our next course is starting on February 27th. It runs for 20 weeks. We meet once each week for about 2.5 hours. There's extra mentoring available through the month should you decide you want to take advantage of that. And so if you are ready to look at getting enrolled and you want more course details, then here is my invitation to you. Take a look at that URL, www.iridology.education/course-info. So that's the URL I posted earlier. Let me just grab that one more time for you here. And look at it, see what you think. And if you're loving what you're seeing, or if you're curious about it and you want more information, there will be an invitation on that page for you to schedule a time to chat with me about the course, right? The purpose of the call is not to hard sell you. It is to find out, do you have the A&P, which you shouldn't even book the call if you don't have the A&P. I want to find out what your goals are, what you already do. How do you envision incorporating iridology into what you do? I want to find out, are you a nice person? Seriously. And we want to find out if this course is actually a good fit for you. And if it is, I will invite you to enroll. You will find that there is no way to enroll in this course without speaking with me directly, because I need to know who you are. I need to know how you are. And from there, then if it's a good fit, I will invite you to be enrolled. Marie says, very interesting, Judith. Thank you for the seminar. I hope you have a happy and healthy new year. Thank you for that, Marie. So with this, we are done. Yay! And I wish you as well a happy, prosperous, joyful, healthy new year. And I look forward to speaking with you in the very near future to talk about whether this is a good fit for you or not, and to potentially get you enrolled. Do take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much and have a good evening. Bye for now.